Baffin Island, Labrador, Newfoundland. Stone sentinels standing guard on the horizon. For ages, these lands of the Canadian far north were coveted by adventurers, trappers, whalers, and fanned the curiosity of explorers and navigators in search of new maritime routes west. Isolated by ice and the harsh climate, these lands of Amerindian and Inuit tradition were long uninhabited and far removed from the upheavals brought about by the colonization of the American continent. So today, the Boreal is entering into a genuine natural sanctuary. The Boreal, designed for the polar regions, is headed for Baffin Island. For 2 weeks, we're going to visit breathtaking landscapes and meet the inhabitants living along the coasts of Labrador and Newfoundland. An exceptional cruise to discover Canada, from the Arctic ice to the islands of the Atlantic. During the voyage, we will often be crossing the routes of the old navigators. When Martin Frobisher, a 16th century English pirate, entered this bay which now bears his name in July 1576, he was convinced that he was sailing in a channel that went from America to Asia. The famous Northwest Passage, located much further north, was not discovered until 1906 by the Norwegian Roald Amundsen. The captain has dropped anchor before the Grinnell Glacier. Very quickly, the first Zodiacs are in the water and heading for the glacier front. Glaciers are not immobile monsters. They advance inexorably towards the sea, where they slough off huge chunks of bluish ice. While the passengers admire the glacier front, the Boreal's nature guides scout out the terrain around the bay where we'll be landing. For the uninitiated, the Arctic world seems like a hostile mineral desert. And yet here in the heart of this grandiose landscape that opens like an amphitheater onto the sea, life has found a niche for itself.
The vegetation here is tundra, this treeless landscape. And yet there are ligneous plants, small shrubs that produce wood but grow very close to the ground. And the cold keeps all this vegetation from growing to any substantial height. But there's indeed vegetation. We have a little over 300 plant species living throughout the Arctic. Liquid water is a rare commodity in the Arctic. There's ice and snow, sure, but not much liquid water. So when there is water, you do get a certain amount of plant growth. And even more so when you have colonies of seabirds or fox burrows, because then, in addition, you have the natural fertilizer. So you can have some really lovely rich tundra.
After a short climb up the mountain slope, we come upon one of the arms of the Grinnell Glacier. From here, we can see down below the former glacial valley, which the glacier carved out for millions of years and then abandoned. The Zodiacs head back to the Boreal. The end of our first day in the Canadian Arctic. We get back underway and head out of Frobisher Bay toward the Hudson Strait and Labrador. At daybreak, we find that the Boreal has unexpectedly changed course. We're heading for the island of Akpatok.
Good morning to all the passengers. This is your captain. It is 7:15. The wind is already a bit brisk. You know that we're in for some bad weather this afternoon, so we've come here a little early this morning to take advantage of the weather. Plus, it's a surprise stopover. So a very good morning to you all. We are nearing Akpatok Island.
The news spreads like wildfire through the boat. There are polar bears at Akpatok. They even give a lecture to get acquainted with this animal, the very symbol of the Arctic.
The polar bear is not really territorial. It goes out onto the ice pack because it depends on the seals, and the seals come up onto the ice pack in winter to give birth, where they're easy prey for the polar bear. Unfortunately, in summer, the ice pack disappears, so the hunting grounds also disappear. So they'll go back to the shores to solid ground and birds, but in the summer, they come back mainly to fast. They can go for 4 months without eating, 8 months for the females. They'll mainly try to find spots where they can keep cool and wait until the ice pack reforms.
The Boreal cautiously approaches the high cliffs that block Akpatok's shores. Up in the bridge, the captain and the expedition leader are preparing the excursion of the passengers.
Attends, l'autre, il est à flanc. Il y en a bien une dizaine près de la cascade. Et puis après, elle est partie.
Akpatok is Bear Island. It's a magnificent island with a vast plateau, cliffs where the guillemots nest. So it's like a food pantry for the bears. And here we're sure to see the bears. I mean, we can already see about 10 near the waterfalls, another dozen on the point. We're going to hug the shore. We're quite safe in the Zodiacs, and we'll be running parallel to the bears who are going to be walking around the beach about 100 meters away. It's a unique, extraordinary sight.
Even though we're being tossed about by the waves that break on the shore, we manage to get a good look at the bears ambling calmly near the water's edge. It's very tempting to move in closer to the shore. But for Nicolas de Breuil, the leader of the expedition, it's out of the question. Much too dangerous.
In the space of 500 meters, we counted about 15, so we can't land or get too close right here. Imagine if the sea were to push us into shore. Those bears aren't afraid of anything. On the contrary, they're very curious. So they would come right up to us and check us out. If a Zodiac gets beached, they'd come right over to see what was going on. So we can't take any risks like that.
We've hardly left Akpatok, and the passengers are already gathered around Nathalie, the ship's photographer, as if to prolong their magical encounter with the bears. The Boreal continues on its way in the Hudson Strait. The day has certainly lived up to our expectations. The captain has every right to smile.
Bonsoir à tous, très chers passagers. Comment allez-vous alors après cette superbe escale à Akpatok?
The Boreal is back on course. Hugging the coast of Labrador, we head for the little Cod Island. This is the first time the captain has dropped anchor in this spot. He sends Nicolas, the expedition leader, out to do reconnaissance, and then the passengers can begin to disembark. Once again, a surprise stopover in the middle of the wild. The Boreal's team of naturalists has specialists in Arctic plant life, others in marine mammals, and also in the history of polar expeditions. But for this cruise, the passengers have a choice lecturer on board. Michel Rocard, former Prime Minister of France, who is now president of the Pole NGO, which assesses the environmental, geopolitical, and economic issues facing the polar regions.
These magnificent landscapes are menaced by the climate change. International diplomacy should be able to establish rules of navigation, rules respecting the environment, rules respecting the wildlife, etc. Plus, we know that beneath the Arctic, further north, there are abundant oil and gas reserves. So, there's the risk that if it's exploited haphazardly without taking the necessary precautions, we'll have more accidents like the one in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a lot of thought being given to strengthening the safety norms, scientific studies to improve safety measures, and then there's the huge unsolved problem of whether it's every country for itself or if there will be international norms.
C'était la rhodiola, avec une fleur un peu rouge.
Il n'y avait pas de fleur.
Ah, il n'y a pas de fleur?
Non.
Ah non, ça c'est l'épilobe à grandes feuilles. C'est la plante nationale du Groenland, mais elle n'est pas en fleurs là.
Et toutes celles qu'on voit, toutes ces feuilles, il y en a qui dépassent un peu plus, c'est toujours des épilobes.
Ici, on a 4 espèces de plantes à baies.
We have 4 species of berry plants here, and it's kind of interesting because in the entire Arctic there are about 300 plant species, and most of them use the wind to scatter their seeds. There are the blueberries, which are purple, ultraviolet. There are the red berries on the opposite end, the cranberries. You have the black ones, another species of cranberry. And then there are the little black ones with bright green leaves, the crowberries. And you get all these different flavors when you eat them. So there's something for everyone, and the birds, the geese, eat them. And then they disperse the seeds through the droppings all along their migration route south. And it's very efficient because you find these plants pretty much everywhere.
Today, everyone is free to wander where they please, exploring the many facets of this Arctic realm. The captain, because he's curious and he needs to relax, never misses a chance to go ashore.
I manage to get out maybe once a day or once every 2 days, it depends. But I try to get out as much as possible, even just for a short time, just half an hour, to feel the atmosphere. And it's a pleasure for me, of course, but also to get an idea of the atmosphere, and it also helps me to understand the passengers' comments.
Ouais, passerelle, le dernier Zodiac quitte la plage. Le dernier Zodiac quitte la plage. Les mouches sont, en fait, elles sont bonnes cuites, en fait. Faut les cuire, en fait. Comme ça, elles
Sailing along the mysterious stone walls of Cod Island, the Boreal once again heads out to the open sea. The Boreal's course is set for the southeast, towards our next port of call in Labrador, the little village of Rigolet. Since we've left the Grinnell Glacier, we've come south around 800 nautical miles, 1,500 kilometers. We're entering into a new world, a world that Nicolas de Broglie savors in his own particular way.
All you have to do is go out on the deck and close your eyes, and all of a sudden you get this whiff of spruce. You can just smell the taiga. We've just crossed an important line for the Arctic because we're right at the limit. We're passing from the Arctic tundra with its low-lying scrub to the taiga with its trees that grow to a height of 2 to 3 meters. And here, all of a sudden, we're back in the midst of life.
Cette région, eh bien, elle a été
10,500 years ago, this entire region was covered by an ice cap, which began to melt and recede. Then, the early settlers moved in, what we call the archaic maritime Indians, meaning Indians who were oriented towards the sea, towards fishing, and even maritime hunting. Then those Indians disappeared. They were followed by a population that we call the Paleo-Eskimos, then the Dorset culture, followed by the Thule people, and lastly, the Labrador Inuit.
The Rorqual whales surface around the ship's bow as if they were welcoming us to Rigolet.
Okay, just you can pay out starboard side 1 meter above the water.
Okay, starboard anchor, pay out 1 meter above the water.
Yes, okay.
When we go ashore at Rigolet, we see that the locals have all gathered to celebrate the beginning of the school year for the village's 48 children. And the village's one and only policeman wouldn't have missed this event for anything in the world.
My job here is to police the community of Rigolet, Labrador. I'm with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and it's simply I do a function like any other police officer in Canada or around the world. I love Labrador. Labrador is an amazing place in Canada. So much space and so many a culture that I do not know in mainstream Canada.
With its mixed Amerindian, Inuit, and European population, Rigolet's history resembles that of Labrador itself. At first, the indigenous population, which lived from hunting and fishing, traded with the whites. But very soon their territory came under the control of the fur trading companies.
From research we've done, we found that Louis Purnell came here in 1743. He did set up a couple of trading posts, one here in Rigolet and one in Northwest River. Upon his leaving, there was another French fur trading company from Quebec who moved in here. They stayed for a short while, and as far as we know, they were bought out by the Hudson's Bay Company, who were in it for the furs and the fishery that existed here at the time. Our ancestors had a very much more simple way of life, but it was, to me, a better way of life because we did more sharing. Nobody was ever left out of, like, when we go hunting or fishing, we come back, we share with the community. That's one of my causes of trying to bring back a part of our heritage, to really stress that maybe it wasn't an easy life, but it was a much better life where you had a closer relationship with people, and I think that's important.
The joyous clamor of the party lingers a moment over Rigolet before evaporating into the atmosphere and giving way to the chorus of nature. It's time to get back on board and pursue our voyage. During the night, we sailed south along the coast of Labrador. In the morning, Newfoundland is in view. The Boreal drops anchor before the historical site of L'Anse aux Meadows, Meadows Cove, the place where it is generally agreed that the Vikings first set foot in America 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. Leaving their villages where the population had outgrown the meager resources, the Vikings set out from Norway at the end of the 9th century. Following the winds and currents, they first colonized Iceland. Then, in 985, Eric the Red discovered Greenland. From that colony, his son Leif Erikson set sail for the west, searching for new lands. Around the year 1000, he reached present-day Newfoundland, where he founded Vinland, and L'Anse-aux-Meadows could very well be that site. This point of dry land in the northern part of Newfoundland has become a historic site, but L'Anse-aux-Meadows touches a particularly sensitive chord for our guide, for Paul is of Norwegian origin.
When I was 8, my father said he already knew about this place. I don't know how he had managed to keep track of that story, but he said that they were going to rewrite history and replace Christopher Columbus by the Vikings.
These rectangular depressions in the ground correspond to several houses of an 11th century Viking village.
In 1914, W.A. Munn, a Newfoundlander, advanced the theory that the Vikings landed at Pistolet Cove, 15 kilometers from here. In 1960, M. Ingstadt, who had been looking for this spot for a long time, used all the information gathered by the previous explorers, and he financed the dig himself. During the excavation, he brought to light a lot of information that agreed with the sagas. In one part of the sagas, Leif Erikson relates that the first winter they spent here, the weather was so mild that the cattle were outdoors the whole year round.
When the Vikings landed in Vinland, the grass was rich green and the temperatures were mild, similar to those of today. To restore the village of L'Anse-aux-Meadows, the architects used traditional materials, clay and straw bricks, and grass-covered roofs, as exist in present-day Iceland and Norway. A good quantity of slag from iron smelting found on the site, as well as many nails used in boat building, lead us to conclude that among the 8 buildings that make up the village, there was most likely a blacksmith shop. It seems that the Vikings did not stay more than 2 or 3 years at L'Anse-aux-Meadows. It was not the cold that drove them away, since the Little Ice Age did not swoop down on North America until 1500. It's more likely that conflicts with the Amerindians were the cause of their departure. At the end of the day, we get back underway, heading for the Gros Morne National Park.
Je vous souhaite un bon appétit.
After struggling a good while to break through the thick blanket of black clouds, the sun's rays eventually managed to pour an incredible golden light down upon the hills surrounding the bay that the Boreal has just entered.
We're slowing down to enter this sheltered inlet here in the southwest of Newfoundland. We're going to proceed slowly to our mooring point at the entrance of Woody Point, straight off our bow.
Fishing is no longer the mainstay of the region as it once was, and the lighthouses are no longer necessary to guide the boats to the safety of the harbor. Magnificent testaments to a bygone age, they now open their doors to the tourists that landed at Woody Point. Most of them come here to visit the Gros Morne National Park, which owes its name to this rounded mountain dominating the landscape. Cedric, our guide, a specialist in geology, takes us to the foot of the Tablelands, one of the most spectacular sights of the Gros Morne National Park.
These tablelands here belong to a very particular layer of our planet. I'm going to show you with a little demonstration. So here you have the planet in miniature. If I cut the planet in two, I can see its interior, which is divided into three main sections. There's the core in the center, surrounded by the mantle, which in turn is covered by the outer crust. The core is about 6,000 kilometers in diameter, the mantle about 3,500 kilometers thick, and the crust is only between 5 and 35 kilometers thick. Every day of our lives, we walk on the Earth's crust. Every day, but not today. The orange rocks you see are the result of a continental collision that took place 500 million years ago. It's solidified magma. The Tablelands is one of the purest, best preserved examples of the Earth's mantle, and that's one of the main reasons that, in 1987, the Gros Morne National Park was one of the rare places to have been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
As spectacular as the Gros Morne National Park may be, it shouldn't overshadow the beauty of the coast, a landscape that symbolizes an entire people's historical link with the sea.
The original settlers came here because of the sea. It was for the fishing industry that really brought them here. Most of them came from other parts of Newfoundland, but originally most of the people in this community or their ancestors came from England. Most of the people started moving in here in the 1800s, but up until 1904, this part of Newfoundland was a part of what was the French shore.
Following the victory of the British in the 7 Years' War in 1763, France was forced to renounce all its American possessions. It nevertheless did manage to keep cod fishing rights on a strip of Newfoundland coast, the so-called French shore, of which Woody Point is a part. we've taken to sea once again. Sailing along the coast of Newfoundland, we cross the Gulf of St. Lawrence, heading for our next port of call, the Magdalen Islands. In the morning, as we're approaching the Magdalen Islands, we sight a good number of whales. After the acrobatics of the whales, it's now the dolphins' turn on center stage. They leap around the ship's bow as if they were pointing out the way for us.
Zéro.
Zéro. Barre est à zéro.
The Boreal anchors not far from the port of Cap-aux-Meules. Whereas fishing, in particular for crab and lobster, is a regular source of income, tourism is largely limited to the short summer season. Doing regular runs all year round between the Magdalen Islands and Montreal, the ferry Vacancier acts as a kind of umbilical cord, linking the islands to the rest of Quebec. The permanent settlement of the islands began here in the historical village of Grave, with the arrival of Acadian families in the early 1760s. This is one of the most popular spots on the islands in the summer. The old warehouses with their colorful wooden facades have been transformed into restaurants, art galleries, and souvenir shops. Small boat races, lobster trap building contests, songfests, all the events have the same basic goal: preserving the Quebecois and Acadian traditions on these tiny islands lost between Newfoundland and Nova Scotia.
Ok, la fosse est amarrée, ok, la fosse est amarrée. Un gros toit m'a chargé de blé au bras et dans l'arrière. Rassons bien partout carré, nous sommes pleinement arrière. Rassons bien partout carré, nous sommes pleinement arrière. Joli marin, gentil gabier, joli marin, gentil gabier. Combien vendez-vous l'armée au bras et dans l'arrière? Rassons bien partout carré, nous sommes pleinement arrière. Rassons bien partout carré, nous sommes pleinement arrière. Pour vous la belle c'est à gagner, pour vous la belle c'est à gagner. Pas 3 minutes partie carré, au bras et dans l'arrière. Rassons bien partout carré, nous sommes pleinement arrière.
Facing out onto the endless sea, these fragile-looking houses were designed to withstand the harsh winter and gales blowing from offshore. That's surely why they sport such bright colors, to defy the bad weather. Claude has first-hand experience with foul weather. He used to be a fisherman, and after surviving a shipwreck, he decided to spend the rest of his life fulfilling a childhood dream and defending Acadian culture.
This is a childhood dream of mine. I have to tell you that when I was a boy, I dreamed of doing this, making a little village when I got older. When my boat ran aground, it prompted me to construct this site that much sooner. And it allowed me to get to know the Acadians. We're trying to transmit the heritage that was handed down to us by our ancestors so that it doesn't die out. I think in the beginning we weren't recognized as Acadians. We were oriented towards New Brunswick. Most of all, we forgot that the original inhabitants of the Madeline Islands were Acadians who had landed on our island. I'd say that the Acadians are a people that has suffered, that is stalwart, a people that has put down roots, a people that has held on to its beliefs and to its customs.
We'll soon be leaving. However, we can't leave the island without taking a moment to admire these cliffs of red sandstone lashed by the waves of the Atlantic. Around sundown, we leave the Magdalen Islands. Our course is set for Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, last port of call on our cruise. Situated off the coast of Newfoundland, the small archipelago of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon is all that remains of New France, the former French Canada.
Ouais, je vais venir là. Parce que là, il va prendre le vent à travers, la deuxième assez vite. Ouais. Stabilisateur rentré.
Saint-Pierre and Miquelon is now a French overseas department. Since the end of New France in 1763, it has lived certain noteworthy episodes. Some heroic, like the rallying of the islands to free France in 1940. Others more, shall we say, surprising, like the schooners and speedboats running liquor and French wines into the USA in the 1920s, during Prohibition. But the island's real history is first and foremost fishing, which started in the 16th century.
The fishermen came here very early on. We don't know exactly when they came for the first time, but we do know that when Jacques Cartier came through here in the 16th century, there were already French fishermen coming to the region, to Saint-Pierre seasonally, they think.
Back in the 16th and 17th centuries, The Basques would come to the banks of Newfoundland and Saint-Pierre and Miquelon to hunt whales. But the golden age of these islands was in the 19th century, the time of the Terre Neuvas, the French cod fishing boats.
Saint-Pierre was considered a base for fishing for the Terre Neuvas, the Newfoundland trawlers that came here from Normandy and Brittany and France in the spring. They came to the Grand Banks to fish for cod, and they'd call in at Saint-Pierre, where they would stock up on food once or twice and unload the salt cod to dry it on the rocky shore, then return to fishing on the Grand Banks. Then they would go back to France, usually in autumn. So those fishing schooners supplied the best part of the salt cod that was consumed in France back then.
Île-aux-Marins is an island just across from the town of Saint-Pierre, also steeped in the history of fishing. Up until the 19th century, all the islanders worked in connection with the Terre Neuvas, or they practiced coastal fishing. In 1955, the last inhabitant left the island, which then remained abandoned for some years. In the 1980s, Île-aux-Marins experienced a revival with the renovation of the old fishermen's houses. Jacques Perrin used to live here. He remembers.
There were 300 or 400 people living on the Île-aux-Marins. The whole island was inhabited by fishermen. I started when I was 13. As we were a big family and I was the oldest, I had to help out my parents. Since I wasn't very good at school and I preferred to go out on the Doris, my father told me, "You'll do like me. You'll work the lines." All these little huts were salting houses where we'd put the fish to salt it. In the autumn, a freighter would come from Spain or somewhere else and it would pick up all the salted fish. Now it's all gone. No more fish. The fish has disappeared. If the fish were ready to make a comeback, I'd get back into the business.
Sailing along the coast of Île-aux-Marins, lit by the last rays of the setting sun, we leave Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. For a few more days, the Boreal will be sailing down the coast of Nova Scotia, heading for Boston. That's where our cruise will end. It's a good moment to hear the captain evoke the highlights of the trip.
We started with Iqaluit, That's really an expedition. Then you have the bears at Akpatak, of course. After, there's the whole what I call ethnological part, the encounters on the islands of Madeleine, Saint-Pierre, and Miquelon. That's always a memorable outing.